Now, Renee Good was a mom who told an officer, which we all have seen on video, "I'm not mad at you." She said, "I'm not mad at you," before she was shot dead.
This is the forensic record of a government execution on a public street in Minneapolis. It is the story of a 37-year-old mother of three and the federal agent who killed her. It is also the story of a coordinated campaign of misinformation coming from the highest levels of the United States government. We will examine the claim. We will present the evidence. We will define the law. We will identify who is responsible. This is the forensic record. Here, play this clip.
I want to just note that we're here because the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, and, of course, broader agencies across DHS are completely out of control. And because Congress has a responsibility to step in when constitutional rights are being violated.
On 8 January 2026, Donald Trump described the killing of Renée Nicole Macklin Good by a federal agent. He claimed she was very disorderly and that she was obstructing and resisting law enforcement. He stated that she then violently, willfully, and viciously ran over an immigration and customs enforcement officer. He further claimed that the agent acted in self-defense. Donald Trump said it was hard to believe the agent was even alive and claimed the officer was recovering in a hospital. That is a lie. Here, play this clip.
Thousands of ICE agents who are now terrorizing cities and killing United States citizens. Now, this chart shows how they made ICE the highest funded law enforcement agency in the history of the United States. 10 years ago, the ICE budget was less than $6 billion. Last year, it was over $85 billion. And if you look at funding for the agency and look at what just happened in the last year, it is stunning to see how much we are spending across this country to terrorize, disfigure, in some cases kill U.S. citizens and people.
The Department of Homeland Security followed this narrative immediately. DHS spokesperson Tricia McLaughlin stated that an ICE officer was fearing for his life and shot Renee Good in self-defense after she attempted to run them over. She went further and described the actions of this American mother as an act of domestic terrorism. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem also claimed that Renee Good attacked the agents and attempted to run them over and ram them with her vehicle. Noem alleged the officer was hit by the vehicle and required hospital treatment for internal bleeding. These are lies. Here, play this clip.
And we've also seen the federal government labeling American citizens as domestic terrorists, calling people, quote, assassins, and falsely claiming they intended to kill law enforcement, which we know, of course, has been untrue. We're seeing the results of policies set by powerful people of no respect for the Constitution, no respect for the law, no respect for basic humility. And these folks here, which we know well, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Kristi Noem, Stephen Miller, of course, Tom Homan and Greg Bovino, these people, every single one of them, has to be held accountable for the crimes, for the terror, and for the murders that are happening to our own people in this country.
We must be precise about what the authorities claimed. Donald Trump's exact words were that Renee Good viciously ran over the ICE officer. Vice President J.D. Vance called her death a tragedy of her own making and labeled her a victim of left-wing ideology. Secretary Noem insisted that the officer was hit by the vehicle. These claims were made as part of Operation Metro Surge, which the DHS described as the largest immigration enforcement operation ever carried out. These authorities were not speaking from a place of uncertainty. When reporters from the New York Times questioned Donald Trump's conclusion in the Oval Office, he was shown video of the incident. The reporters noted that the video did not show the officer being run over. Trump responded by saying, "Well, the way I look at it." Here, play this clip.
I want to just note that we're here because the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, and, of course, broader agencies across DHS are completely out of control. And because Congress has a responsibility to step in when constitutional rights are being violated. Now, Renee Good was a mom who told an officer, which we all have seen on video, I'm not mad at you. She said, I'm not mad at you, before she was shot dead.
This demonstrates that the administration's claims were not based on the visual record, but on a preordained narrative designed to protect federal agents from accountability. The forensic evidence begins with the video recorded by the killer himself. Agent Jonathan Ross was not wearing a standard body-worn camera, despite the agency being flush with cash. Instead, he used his personal cell phone to film the encounter. The New York Times and ABC News performed frame-by-frame analyses of this and other footage. The visual record shows that at 9:37:08, ICE agents approached Renee Good's SUV. One agent ordered her to get out of the fucking car while reaching through her open window. Renee Good began to drive forward. She turned the steering wheel to the right, away from Agent Ross, to follow the flow of traffic on the one-way street. Forensic analysis shows that as the SUV moved forward, Agent Ross was at least a few feet away. He did not move out of the way. Instead, he unholstered his firearm. The footage shows a visible gap between the vehicle and the agent's legs. His feet were positioned outside the path of the SUV. The evidence proves that Agent Ross stayed upright on his feet throughout the entire incident. He was not run over. He was not knocked to the ground. He leaned forward and fired 3 shots into the SUV as it passed him. The first shot went through the front windshield. The second and third shots were fired through the driver's side window as the vehicle departed. The New York Times analysis concludes there is no indication Agent Ross was run over. An independent autopsy commissioned by the family confirms the terminal nature of these shots. Renee Good was struck in the left forearm, the right breast, and the left temple. The temple wound indicates the bullet went through her head, likely killing her instantly. This contradicts the DHS claim of self-defense. A person who is driving away is not an imminent threat to an officer standing on the side of the road. The forensic record also includes the audio from Agent Ross's own phone. After firing the fatal shots, the recording captures a male voice saying, "fucking bitch." Voice and video analysis identify this as Agent Ross speaking. This audio evidence proves the agent's state of mind. It was not a professional response to a perceived threat. It was a verbal assault on a woman he had just shot in the head. The power dynamics of this incident reveal a total lack of institutional control. Operation Metro Surge flooded Minneapolis with 2,000 agents. This surge was funded by a Republican tax and spending bill that gave ICE $85 billion over 4 years. This is the highest funding for any law enforcement agency in United States history. Yet, this funding did not go toward oversight or safety. It went toward hiring thousands of agents who, according to Representative Robert Garcia, are now terrorizing cities. Control of the crime scene was used to obstruct the truth. Immediately after the shooting, federal agents blocked a bystander who identified himself as a physician and asked to check the victim's pulse. The agent's response was, "I don't care." While Renee Good lay dying with no pulse, several agents, including the one who opened fire, got into their vehicles and drove off. This altered the active crime scene. The federal government then asserted total control over the investigation. The FBI revoked the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's access to evidence, reversing an agreement for a joint investigation. This froze out local prosecutors and state investigators. U.S. Attorney Daniel N. Rosen instructed prosecutors to say nothing to law enforcement or the media. This is the definition of a cover-up performed in plain sight. The control extended to the victims' families and the public. DHS Secretary Noem reinstated a 7-day waiting period for congressional oversight of detention facilities. This prevented elected representatives like Ilhan Omar and Angie Craig from overseeing the facilities where people were being held. The administration used its power to investigate the victim's widow rather than the shooter. This is a reversal of the traditional role of the Department of Justice. The strongest defense offered by the administration is that Agent Ross acted in self-defense because he was struck by a moving vehicle. They point to grainy video from a distance that they claim shows contact. They claim the agent suffered internal bleeding. This argument is dismantled by the law and the higher resolution visual evidence. DHS policy directives instruct officers to avoid intentionally and unreasonably placing themselves in positions where they have no alternative but to use deadly force. Agent Ross moved directly in front of the SUV as it was initiating a 3-point turn to leave. Law enforcement experts note that officers are trained to avoid this because it creates the danger they then use to justify force. Even if there was minor contact, the SUV was turning away from the agent when he fired the second and third shots. The claim of internal bleeding is not supported by any documentation in the incident reports. Agent Ross remained upright and on his feet. He was seen walking and talking for over a minute after the shooting. He did not require medical attention on the scene. The Star Tribune noted the lack of any medical records to support the hospitalization claim. The defense of self-defense fails when the officer is the one who created the confrontation and was not in danger at the moment the fatal shots were fired. Furthermore, the administration claims that Renee Good was stalking and impeding ICE all day. This is dismantled by the testimony of her mother and ex-husband, who confirmed she was not an activist and had just dropped her 6-year-old son off at school. She was on her way home when she encountered the agents. Even if she were observing the agents, legal observers are protected by the First Amendment. The government cannot kill a citizen for the crime of being in the way of a traffic jam they caused. To understand why there is no accountability, we must understand the legal barriers. There is a common belief that American citizens can sue federal agents for constitutional violations. Under current law, this is almost impossible. 42 U.S. Code Section 1983 allows citizens to sue state and local officers for civil rights violations. However, this 155-year-old law does not apply to federal officers like those in ICE or Border Patrol. Attorney Antonio Romanucci explained that the current path to recovery is through the Federal Tort Claims Act. This is an uphill climb that requires the government's permission to sue the government. It requires filing a claim with the same agency that harmed you and waiting 6 months for a reply. This legal paradox means that if the government must give you permission to seek accountability, your rights are just words on paper. Then there is the doctrine of qualified immunity. This is a court-invented rule that protects law enforcement from being held responsible unless it is clearly established that they violated the law. In the case of federal agents, the Supreme Court has limited the ability to sue even further. Vice President J.D. Vance has openly stated that these agents are protected by absolute immunity. While he later walked this back, the practical reality is that federal agents behave with absolute impunity because they know the legal system is rigged in their favor. The law also defines when deadly force is appropriate. Under the 1989 Supreme Court case Graham v. Connor, force must be objectively reasonable and proportional. Proportionality means you cannot use an assault rifle if the threat is minor. Professional policing also forbids shooting at moving vehicles because it is unlikely to stop the vehicle and creates an unguided missile. The agents in Minneapolis violated these established legal and professional norms repeatedly. The professional judgment on Agent Jonathan Ross and the leadership of DHS is one of total failure. Professor Seth Stoughton, a former police officer and law expert, testified that this administration's approach is neither professional nor democratically acceptable. He noted a profound failure of leadership after incidents that never should have happened. The tactics used, masking agents, using unmarked vehicles, and refusing to identify themselves, are hallmarks of authoritarianism. The fitness of Agent Ross is called into question by his career trajectory. He was a machine gunner in the Iraq War before joining Border Patrol and then ICE. Experts noted that his decision to film a confrontation with a cell phone in one hand while holding a gun in the other is not part of any legitimate law enforcement training. It demonstrates that he did not perceive Renee Good as an imminent threat. If he had, he would have used both hands to secure the scene rather than trying to record a viral video. The culture of the agency is revealed in the internal communications of other agents. In the case of Marimar Martinez, who was shot 5 times by Border Patrol agent Charles Exum, the agent bragged about the shooting. His text messages read, "I fired 5 rounds and she had 7 holes. Put that in your book, boys." This callousness and cruelty show a systemic failure in recruiting and training. The agency has hired thousands of recruits without finishing background checks, some of whom had criminal histories or failed drug tests. This is not a professional police force. It is an armed group operating without guardrails. The judgment on Secretary Kristi Noem and President Trump is that they have abandoned the rule of law. By issuing exonerating conclusions within hours of a killing, they contaminate investigations and corrode public trust. They have signaled to agents in the field that they can kill with impunity. This is a betrayal of the oath of office and the basic principles of human decency. The evidence against the administration is supported by a stack of expert authorities. Representative Robert Garcia, the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, has tracked 470 incidents of immigration enforcement violence. Senator Richard Blumenthal, a veteran of the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, has called for a complete overhaul of the DHS. These are the elected officials charged with oversight of these agencies. The technical expertise comes from Professor Seth Stoughton of the University of South Carolina School of Law. As the Faculty Director of Excellence in Policing, he has studied police policy for over a decade. He testified that federal immigration authorities are ignoring established professional norms and basic tenets of federalism. He is joined by Professor Jeff Alpert, a criminology expert who questioned the tactical validity of the Minneapolis shooting. Legal authority is provided by Antonio Romanucci, the civil rights attorney who represented the family of George Floyd. He testified that the occupation of cities by ICE and CBP is way beyond their mission. He noted that the character assassinations of victims must stop. Additionally, more than a dozen federal prosecutors in Minneapolis and Washington resigned in protest of the DOJ's refusal to investigate this case. These are high-ranking officials within the justice system who determined that the administration's actions were indefensible. Medical and forensic authority includes the independent autopsy findings released by Romanucci and Blandon. It also includes the skepticism of intensive care nurses at Hennepin County Medical Center. These medical professionals doubted the federal agent's claims that another detainee had run headfirst into a brick wall while handcuffed, noting the injuries were inconsistent with the story. This stack of experts, lawyers, professors, prosecutors, and doctors all point to a single conclusion. The official government story is a fabrication. Institutional accountability has collapsed at the federal level. The Department of Justice, under Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, has refused to open a criminal investigation into Agent Jonathan Ross. Blanche claimed that an investigation was unnecessary because everybody can watch the videos and see that Ross got attacked. This statement ignores the detailed forensic analysis showing the agent was never in the path of the vehicle. The FBI revoking state access to evidence is a direct failure of institutional transparency. This move was described by Ken Martin, chair of the Democratic National Committee, as a fucking cover-up. The DOJ's Civil Rights Division, which is supposed to protect citizens from government overreach, has been disabled. Harmeet Dillon, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, declined to investigate whether Renee Good's rights were violated. This led to the mass exodus of experienced prosecutors who refused to be part of the obstruction. The courts have offered some resistance, but it is limited. A federal judge in Texas had to mandate the release of 5-year-old Liam Ramos and his father after they were held in, quote, tender age detention centers. Judge Fred Beery called the operation ill-conceived and incompetently implemented. He noted the administration's, quote, lust for unbridled power and the imposition of cruelty. Despite this, the administration continues to appeal rulings that favor the victims of their policies. Enforcement failures are also evident in the DHS's internal oversight. 2 other oversight offices, the Citizenship and Immigration Services Ombudsman and the Immigration Detention Ombudsman, were closed or disabled. Without these guardrails, there is no internal mechanism to review policies or prevent misconduct. The agency is operating as a law unto itself, accountable only to a president who has threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act to deploy military troops against protesters. The procedural consequences of these actions are now unfolding. In the House of Representatives, articles of impeachment have been introduced against DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. These articles cite obstruction of congressional oversight and violations of the public trust. While the Republican-controlled House makes the passage of these articles unlikely, they serve as a formal record of the Secretary's failures. In the courts, the state of Minnesota, along with the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, has filed a lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security. They are seeking to halt the deployment of ICE agents to the state, arguing that the federal surge is unconstitutional and damaging to public safety. This legal battle will determine the extent to which a state can protect its citizens from federal law enforcement violence. The funding of the agency is the next procedural battleground. Congress is currently negotiating a spending package to end a partial government shutdown. Senate Democrats have pledged to withhold votes for Homeland Security funding unless fundamental reforms are implemented. These reforms include mandatory body-worn cameras, the identification of all officers, and the requirement of judicial warrants for enforcement operations. A 10-day window has been set to negotiate these changes. Finally, there is the potential for state-level criminal charges. While federal officers are often protected by the Supremacy Clause, the Supreme Court ruled in Martin v. United States that this protection only applies if they acted in a necessary and proper fashion. Legal analysts suggest that state prosecutors in Minnesota could still lay homicide charges against Agent Jonathan Ross. This would move the case from a federal system that refuses to investigate to a state system that is being urged by the public to act. These are the cold procedural realities of a system attempting to correct itself after a fatal abuse of power. The case of Renee Good is not a matter of opinion. It is a matter of record. The record shows she was killed while driving away. The record shows the government lied about it. The record now moves to the halls of Congress and the state courts. This is the end of the forensic record.